Saddam Hussein was a name that once commanded fear and attention across the globe. For decades, he was the absolute ruler of Iraq, a nation rich in oil and ancient history. His image was everywhere in his country, on posters, statues, and television screens. He presented himself as a strong Arab leader, a defender of his people against foreign enemies. But behind this carefully crafted image was a story of immense power, brutal repression, and devastating wars. This is the story of how a boy from a small village rose to become one of the most powerful and feared dictators of the 20th century. Understanding Saddam Hussein's life is essential to understanding the modern history of Iraq and the wider Middle East. His decisions shaped the lives of millions of people, not just within his own borders, but far beyond. He led his country into two major wars that changed the balance of power in the region. He challenged the world's superpowers and faced international condemnation for his actions. The story of his rule is a complex tapestry of ambition, violence, and political maneuvering that left a deep and lasting scar on his nation. It is a story that continues to influence events in Iraq even today. This essay will explore the untold story of Saddam Hussein. We will look at his journey from a difficult childhood to his seizure of ultimate authority. We will examine the nature of his government and the key events that defined his time in power. The narrative will cover his brutal campaigns against his own citizens, the international conflicts he initiated, and the US-led invasion that ultimately brought his regime to an end. It is a story that did not end with his fall from power, but continued through a dramatic capture, a historic trial, and a final controversial execution. The fall of Saddam Hussein was a pivotal moment in modern history. It was seen by some as the liberation of a nation, and by others as the beginning of a new era of instability and conflict. His capture was a symbolic victory for the United States and its allies, but it did not bring an immediate end to the violence in Iraq. Saddam Hussein was born on April 28, 1937, in a small village called Al-Auja, near the city of Tikrit. His childhood was marked by poverty and instability. His father disappeared before he was born, and his mother remarried a man who was reportedly cruel to him. These early years were difficult and shaped his character in profound ways. He grew up feeling like an outsider, developing a deep sense of ambition and a desire to prove his worth. He dreamed of a life far from the poverty of his village, a life of power and respect that seemed impossible to reach. At a young age, Saddam moved to Baghdad to live with his uncle, Khairallah Talfa. His uncle was a staunch Arab nationalist and an army officer who deeply influenced Saddam's political views. He instilled in the young Saddam a powerful sense of Arab identity and a deep distrust of foreign powers, particularly Western colonialists. Under his uncle's guidance, Saddam began to read political texts and became involved in the revolutionary movements that were sweeping through the Middle East at the time. He joined the Ba'ath Party, a political group that aimed to unite all Arab nations into one powerful state. His involvement with the Ba'ath Party quickly moved from political discussion to direct action. In 1959, he was part of a team that attempted to assassinate Iraq's leader at the time, Prime Minister Abdulkarim Qasim. The assassination attempt failed, and Saddam was wounded in the leg during the escape. This event, though a failure, turned him into a wanted man and a hero within the party. He fled the country, first to Syria and then to Egypt, where he continued his political activities and studies. This period in exile only strengthened his resolve and his commitment to the Ba'athist cause. His time as a young revolutionary was a training ground for his future political career. He learned about conspiracy, loyalty, and the importance of ruthlessness in the pursuit of power. He built a network of contacts and earned a reputation as a dedicated and fearless party member. When the Ba'ath Party finally succeeded in taking power in Iraq in 1968, Saddam Hussein was ready. He returned from exile not just as a member, but as a key figure poised to take a leading role in the new government. His difficult childhood and his years as a revolutionary had prepared him for the next stage of his journey, the climb to absolute power. When the Ba'ath Party seized control of Iraq in a bloodless coup in 1968, Saddam Hussein was not the top leader. The new president was his older cousin, Ahmed Hassan al-Bakr. However, Saddam quickly became the second most powerful man in the country. He took charge of the state's internal security services, a position that gave him immense power. He used this role to build a vast network of informers and secret police. This security apparatus became the foundation of his power, allowing him to monitor and eliminate anyone he saw as a threat to the party or to his own ambitions. Over the next decade, Saddam worked tirelessly to consolidate his influence. He was a master of political strategy, placing loyal followers in key positions throughout the government, the military, and the Ba'ath Party itself. He understood that true power came not just from official titles, but from controlling the levers of force and fear. He established multiple intelligence agencies that often spied on each other, ensuring that no single person or group could challenge his authority. He was patient and methodical, slowly but surely making himself the indispensable figure at the center of the Iraqi state. One of his most significant moves was to nationalize Iraq's oil industry in 1972. At the time, foreign companies controlled the country's vast oil wealth. By taking it back, Saddam became a hero to many Iraqis and other Arabs. The move brought enormous revenues into the state's treasury, which he used to modernize the country. He funded massive projects in education, healthcare, and infrastructure. This greatly improved the standard of living for many ordinary Iraqis and helped build a base of popular support for the Ba'athist regime. It was a clever mix of populism and control. By 1979, President al-Bakar's health was failing, and Saddam saw his moment. On July 16, 1979, he forced the aging president to resign and assumed the presidency himself. To ensure his grip on power was absolute, he immediately called a meeting of high-ranking Ba'ath Party officials. In a chilling televised event, he read out the names of dozens of officials, accusing them of conspiracy and treason. These men were taken from the room one by one to be arrested and later executed. This brutal purge sent a clear message to everyone in Iraq. Saddam Hussein was now in total control, and any form of dissent would be met with death. Once he became president, Saddam Hussein's rule transformed Iraq into a totalitarian state. His control over the country was absolute and unquestionable. The government was not a system of laws and institutions, but an extension of his personal will. He dominated every aspect of Iraqi life, from the economy to the media. State television and newspapers were filled with praise for his wisdom and leadership. A powerful cult of personality was built around him, with his portrait displayed in every public building, school, and street corner. To speak against him was to risk imprisonment, torture, or death. The government was structured to ensure loyalty to Saddam above all else. Power was concentrated in the hands of a small circle of trusted individuals, many of whom were his relatives from his hometown of Tikrit. This reliance on family and clan ties was a way to guard against betrayal. He created a complex and overlapping system of security forces, including the Republican Guard and various intelligence agencies that reported directly to him. These organizations were tasked with crushing any opposition and instilling a constant state of fear among the population. This system made it nearly impossible for any organized resistance to form. Under his leadership, Iraq's economy was centrally controlled and heavily dependent on oil revenues. During the oil boom of the 1970s, this wealth allowed him to fund ambitious development programs. He built modern roads, hospitals, and schools, and he launched a successful literacy campaign. These achievements earned him some genuine popularity, especially in the early years of his rule. However, this progress came at a terrible price. The prosperity was built on a foundation of fear, and the state's resources were often diverted to fund his massive military and lavish personal projects, rather than the long-term well-being of the Iraqi people. The political climate in Saddam's Iraq was one of complete suppression. There were no free elections, no free press, and no political parties other than the Ba'ath Party. Any form of independent thought or expression was seen as a threat. Intellectuals, artists, and community leaders who did not conform to the regime's ideology were silenced. The government used propaganda to promote a specific version of history and national identity, one that glorified Saddam as the nation's protector. This iron-fisted control created a society where people were afraid to trust their neighbors, and survival often depended on demonstrating unwavering loyalty to the leader. In September of 1980, Saddam Hussein launched a full-scale invasion of neighboring Iran. He hoped for a quick victory that would make him the dominant leader in the Persian Gulf. Saddam saw an opportunity in the chaos that followed Iran's Islamic Revolution of 1979. He aimed to seize control of the Shatt al-Arab waterway, which was a vital shipping route for both countries, and to prevent the new Iranian government from spreading its revolutionary ideas to Iraq's large Shia Muslim population. What he expected to be a short war turned into a brutal 8-year conflict, one of the longest and deadliest wars of the 20th century. The Iran-Iraq War was devastating for both nations. It resulted in an estimated 1 million casualties and caused immense economic damage. The fighting was characterized by trench warfare, human wave attacks, and the use of chemical weapons. Saddam's forces used mustard gas and nerve agents against Iranian soldiers and later against his own people. The war became a bloody stalemate, with neither side able to achieve a decisive victory. It finally ended in 1988 with a UN-brokered ceasefire, leaving both countries exhausted and deeply in debt. The war failed to achieve any of Saddam's initial goals and left Iraq's economy in ruins. Just 2 years after the war with Iran ended, Saddam made another fateful decision. On August 2, 1990, he ordered his army to invade and annex the small, oil-rich country of Kuwait. He accused Kuwait of stealing Iraqi oil by slant drilling under the border and of driving down oil prices, which hurt Iraq's economy. He also claimed that Kuwait was historically part of Iraq. This blatant act of aggression was immediately condemned by the international community. The United Nations Security Council passed resolutions demanding Iraq's withdrawal and imposed crippling economic sanctions on them. The invasion of Kuwait led to a swift and powerful international response. The United States, under President George H.W. Bush, assembled a broad coalition of nations to oppose the Iraqi aggression. In January of 1991, after Saddam refused to withdraw his forces, the coalition launched Operation Desert Storm. A massive air campaign was followed by a ground offensive that liberated Kuwait in just 100 hours. The Iraqi army was decisively defeated, but the coalition chose not to push on to Baghdad to overthrow Saddam. Instead, he was left in power, albeit weakened and isolated, under the watch of strict international sanctions that would cripple his country for the next decade. Saddam Hussein's rule was defined not only by external wars, but also by extreme brutality against his own citizens. He targeted any group he perceived as a threat to his authority. The Shia Muslim majority, who had ties to Iran, were systematically oppressed. After the 1991 Gulf War, when Shia communities in southern Iraq rose up in rebellion, Saddam's forces crushed the uprising with overwhelming force. His army destroyed towns and cities, drained the historic southern marshlands to flush out rebels, and killed tens of thousands of people. This campaign of terror was designed to ensure that the Shia population would never again challenge his rule. The Kurdish people of northern Iraq suffered even more terribly under his regime. The Kurds, an ethnic group with their own language and culture, had long sought autonomy or independence. Saddam viewed their aspirations as a threat to Iraq's unity. In the late 1980s, during the final stages of the Iran-Iraq War, he launched a genocidal campaign against them known as the Untold campaign. This systematic operation involved the destruction of thousands of Kurdish villages, the forced displacement of populations, and mass executions. It is estimated that between 50,000 and 182,000 Kurdish civilians were killed during this brutal campaign. The most infamous event of the Untold campaign was the chemical attack on the Kurdish town of Halabja on March 16, 1988. On that day, Iraqi warplanes dropped a deadly cocktail of mustard gas and nerve agents on the town's civilian population. An estimated 5,000 people, mostly women and children, died within minutes. Thousands more suffered from long-term health problems, including cancer, blindness, and birth defects. The Halabja massacre was a horrific act that showed the world the extent of Saddam's cruelty and his willingness to use weapons of mass destruction against his own people. These acts of violence were not random. They were part of a deliberate state policy to maintain power through fear. The government used torture, public executions, and forced disappearances as routine tools of control. Entire families of suspected opponents would be punished to deter others from dissent. The culture of fear was so pervasive that people were afraid to speak freely, even in their own homes. The human rights abuses committed by Saddam's regime left deep wounds in Iraqi society, creating divisions and resentments between different ethnic and religious groups that would explode into violence after his fall from power. After the 1991 Gulf War, Iraq was placed under strict international sanctions. The United Nations demanded that Saddam Hussein's regime dismantle all of its weapons of mass destruction, including chemical, biological, and nuclear weapons programs. UN weapons inspectors were sent to Iraq to oversee this process. For the next 12 years, there was, a constant cat-and-mouse game between the inspectors and the Iraqi government. Saddam's regime often obstructed their work, leading to suspicions that he was hiding weapons. This ongoing confrontation kept Iraq isolated from the international community and caused immense suffering for its people due to the economic sanctions. The political landscape changed dramatically after the terrorist attacks of September 11, 2001 in the United States. The administration of President George W. Bush adopted a new, more aggressive foreign policy focused on confronting states that it accused of supporting terrorism and pursuing weapons of mass destruction. Iraq, under Saddam Hussein, was identified as a key threat. The US government, along with its main ally, the United Kingdom, began to build a case for military action. They argued that Saddam's regime possessed weapons of mass destruction, had ties to terrorist groups like Al-Qaeda, and posed an imminent danger to the world. Despite significant international opposition and debates within the United Nations, the United States moved forward with its plans for an invasion. In March 2003, a US-led coalition launched Operation Iraqi Freedom. The invasion began with a massive bombing campaign against targets in Baghdad and other major cities. This was followed by a swift ground invasion from the south. The Iraqi military, weakened by years of sanctions and low morale, offered little effective resistance. Within 3 weeks, coalition forces had captured Baghdad, and the symbols of Saddam's regime came crashing down. The fall of his statue in Firdos Square became an iconic image of the end of his rule. The collapse of the government was swift, but Saddam Hussein himself was nowhere to be found. As the coalition forces secured control of the country, he and other top leaders of his regime went into hiding. The fall of Baghdad on April 9, 2003, marked the official end of his 24-year reign of terror. For many Iraqis, it was a moment of celebration and hope for a better future. However, the invasion also plunged the country into a new period of chaos, insurgency, and sectarian violence. The fall of the dictator was just the beginning of a long and difficult chapter for Iraq. After the fall of Baghdad, Saddam Hussein vanished. He became the most wanted man in the world, with the US military placing a $25 million bounty on his head. For 8 months, he managed to evade capture, moving between various safe houses in the region around his hometown of Tikrit. He released several audio recordings, trying to rally his supporters to fight against the coalition forces. The US military launched a massive manhunt, conducting numerous raids and interrogating former regime officials to track him down. The search for Saddam was a top priority, as his capture was seen as crucial to breaking the morale of the growing insurgency. The breakthrough came from information gathered from a man who was part of Saddam's inner circle of bodyguards. This information led a team of US Special Forces to a farm in the small town of Adwa, just south of Tikrit. On the evening of December 13, 2003, the soldiers launched a raid on the location, codenamed Operation Red Dawn. After searching the main buildings, they discovered a suspicious-looking patch of ground near a small mud hut. When they cleared away the dirt and a piece of styrofoam, they found the entrance to a small underground hideout, just big enough for one person to lie down in. A disheveled and bearded man emerged from the hole. It was Saddam Hussein. He was disoriented and offered no resistance, reportedly saying, "I am Saddam Hussein, President of Iraq, and I want to negotiate." The soldiers who captured him told him that President Bush sends his regards. He was armed with a pistol, but did not use it. The once powerful dictator, who had lived in lavish palaces and commanded a massive army, was found hiding in a dirty hole in the ground. The capture was a major symbolic victory for the US and its allies, and the news was celebrated by many Iraqis who had suffered under his rule. The image of the captured Saddam, with his long, unkempt hair and beard, was broadcast around the world. It was a stark contrast to the powerful figure he had once been. His capture did not end the violence in Iraq, as the insurgency continued to grow in strength. However, it did remove any lingering doubt that his regime was gone for good. For the Iraqi people, it meant that they would no longer have to live in fear of his return. The capture of Saddam Hussein paved the way for the next and final chapter of his story, his trial for the crimes he had committed against his own people. After his capture, Saddam Hussein was held in US custody for months, while the newly formed Iraqi interim government prepared to put him on trial. The trial began on October 19, 2005, in a specially constructed courtroom in Baghdad's heavily fortified Green Zone. He and 7 of his former top officials were charged with crimes against humanity. The first case brought against them focused on the killing of 148 Shia men and boys from the town of Dujail in 1982. This was a reprisal killing that Saddam ordered after a failed assassination attempt against him in the town. This specific case was chosen because the evidence was strong and well documented. The trial was a historic and often chaotic event. It was broadcast on television, allowing the Iraqi people and the world to see their former dictator being held accountable for his actions. Saddam was defiant throughout the proceedings. He challenged the legitimacy of the court, arguing that he was still the rightful president of Iraq. He frequently argued with the judges, went on hunger strikes, and his defense lawyers often boycotted the hearings. The trial was seen by some as a crucial step towards establishing the rule of law in the new Iraq, while others criticized it as a flawed process influenced by the victors. On November 5, 2006, after more than a year of testimony and legal arguments, the verdict was delivered. Saddam Hussein was found guilty of crimes against humanity for his role in the Dujail massacre and was sentenced to death by hanging. The verdict was met with celebrations in Shia and Kurdish areas of Iraq, but with anger and protests in some Sunni communities. His appeals were rejected, and the sentence was upheld. The trial was just the first of several that were planned to address the full scope of his regime's atrocities, including the Untold campaign and the use of chemical weapons. But the death sentence for the Dujail case brought the legal process to a swift conclusion. In the early morning hours of December 30, 2006, Saddam Hussein was executed. The execution was carried out by Iraqi officials, though it was filmed on a mobile phone, and the footage was quickly leaked to the public. The video showed him being taunted by his executioners in his final moments, which sparked widespread controversy and condemnation. The timing of his execution, on the first day of the important Sunni holiday of Eid al-Adha, further inflamed sectarian tensions in Iraq. The final undignified moments of his life marked a violent end to a violent rule, closing a dark chapter in Iraq's history, but leaving behind a legacy of division and conflict. The rule of Saddam Hussein left an indelible and painful mark on Iraq. His legacy is one of deep division, trauma, and instability. By systematically oppressing the Shia and Kurdish populations while favoring his own Sunni clan, he created deep sectarian and ethnic resentments that tore the fabric of Iraqi society apart. After his fall, these tensions exploded into a brutal civil war that claimed hundreds of thousands of lives. The political system he built, based on fear and absolute loyalty to one man, left the country with no strong institutions or tradition of democratic governance, making the transition to a stable democracy incredibly difficult. His wars with Iran and Kuwait had devastating consequences, not only for Iraq but for the entire Middle East. The Iran-Iraq war drained the resources of both nations and solidified the regional rivalry between Arab states and Iran. The invasion of Kuwait led to a permanent US military presence in the region, which has shaped its politics ever since. The crippling sanctions imposed on Iraq after the Gulf War destroyed its economy and infrastructure, leading to a humanitarian crisis that affected an entire generation of Iraqis. These conflicts reshaped regional alliances and created new sources of instability that persist to this day. The 2003 US-led invasion that overthrew him is also a major part of his legacy. While it removed a brutal dictator from power, the war and its aftermath were catastrophic. The justifications for the war, particularly the claim that Iraq possessed weapons of mass destruction, were later found to be false. The invasion unleashed a violent insurgency and created a power vacuum that allowed extremist groups like Al-Qaeda and later ISIS to flourish. The decision to invade Iraq remains one of the most controversial foreign policy decisions of the 21st century, with long-lasting consequences for global security and America's role in the world. Today, more than 2 decades after his fall, Iraq is still grappling with the legacy of Saddam Hussein. The country continues to face challenges related to political corruption, sectarian divisions, and economic reconstruction. The memory of his brutal rule serves as a constant reminder of the dangers of unchecked power and the importance of justice and human rights. The story of his rise and fall is not just a piece of history. It is a crucial lesson for understanding the ongoing struggles in Iraq and the complexities of the modern Middle East. It shows how the actions of one leader can shape the destiny of a nation for generations.